everyone. Today on Real Talk, we have Miss Judy Villeneuve here today. I'm going to refer to her as Judy as we go through this interview. And I must say, Judy is a member of the Jamaican community, a critical thinker when it comes down to policy and practice. Judy tends to make the connection between policy and the gaps and so forth. I've had several occasions where we have sat on panels together, and I'm always impressed by her knowledge regarding the design, development, and implementation of policy. Therefore, it's my pleasure to welcome Judy to this Real Talk, a conversation regarding policy and practice. And I will take you through a few questions, and I hope that you will continue to do your work as it relates to policy and practice. Now, again, welcome to Real Talk.
Thank
I
you so
want
much, Dr. Jowallah. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here.
It is a pleasure for me to have you here again. I want us to have an overview of who this wonderful researcher is, and I want to give the viewers a bit more. Tell us about your background and your connection to the Rock, Jamaica.
Okay, absolutely. Well, I actually was born in the United States. My parents met at Howard University, both of whom are from Jamaica. My father was studying dentistry, and my mom was getting her master's in public administration. And so I spent many years as a child after my father graduated from dental school back in Jamaica with my parents. And being a typical Jamaican, wanting to be very ambitious and pursue her education, my mom decided she wanted to go to law school. So we ended up coming back to the United States, and she pursued her law degree at Georgetown. And we stayed after that, and she ended up pursuing immigration law. And my father is someone who is very patriotic. He's somebody who wanted to stay in Jamaica and make a difference there. So I am very, I guess you could say, humbled and proud to say that I'm from two very, I guess, strong Jamaican people. My mom thought it was very important for me to go back on a regular basis to really understand who I was and my identity. And I guess you could say I've never lost the pride that I have in Jamaica, and it's a real pleasure to be working in a capacity where I can be working so closely with people like yourselves. And as you know, Dr. Dice, through whom we've met, and so many other fantastic, dedicated education professionals that are hailing from Jamaica. One of the reasons why I pursued a career in education in particular was because I know how critical it was to the advancement of my family. And when I had come to the United States, having gone to several private schools here, I realized that there was this fallacy, this firm belief in the fact that poor performance was tied to race and ethnicity. And I knew very well from multiple examples that this wasn't true. But yet the data that I was being exposed to through my employment at the time as a consultant for the New York City Department of Education it was as if this was a fact on which every policy that was established stemmed from a fact that I knew was a fallacy. So that's when I decided that that's probably where I should be spending my energy. How can I be at the table, make a difference in education policy, and bring a truth, right, to the fact that there is no connection between race and an inability, let's say, people of color's inability to be able to perform academically. What are the mitigating factors, in fact, that we should be considering that actually stem from structural racism, misdistribution of resources, the idea of something much greater, and that greater being what is the overall societal intention for certain populations, right? And how is the educational system impacting the creation of certain populations to serve in certain professional and non-professional capacities to fulfill the overall goal of the society. right? So all of these questions were very big for me and something that I wanted to at least make some level of contribution to, but not from an academic standpoint.
Mm.
I value and respect educators so much because they're really in the trenches as far as the training that needs to take place for our students. However, the decisions happen much higher up in what we call a pyramid structure. A lot of decisions are being made by people who have had very little or none at all experience in the classroom with students, right? So what's impacting their decision have a lot more to do with what's going on at a financial level. What is the politics that's happening at the level throughout the country, in that city? What are the pre-existing conditions of certain populations that been used as an excuse to continue the perpetuation of, I guess you could say, mediocre education,
Yes,
right?
yes. Which brings me to another point, because you have spent a lot of time looking at policy and you have established there's no correlation, as you stated before. And I have a thought. The thought is that the education system globally, and especially in these developed countries, United States, England, was never developed on a principle of equality. How do you see that affecting your work as you go through? Because do you have the same idea? And if so, how do you address this as you go through navigating your terrain?
Okay, so what you have to approach making a contribution in policy incrementally. You have to think of the long-term goal of the contribution that you're making. It's not something, it's a, let's say, I would describe it as a ship, a gigantic ship that's already sailing, okay? And in order to make it turn, it's going to take persistence, it's going to take persuasion, it's going to take joint effort. You have to find like-minded people in order to guide yourself in a new direction. And it's going to take some time because it's already propelling, with full force in a direction that is, as you know, isn't where you want to go. So that's the way that I have to understand the policy contributions that I make and contribute to within the organization that I work.
So I'm
Um,
going to ask you another question, because you're prompting my thoughts. So what do you say
okay.
to a critic that says to you, listen, we have been waiting 400 years. What is your response to someone like that who's saying, listen, we have waited far too long, 400 years, it's time to change now? Because some people listening might be asking that question. What would you say to them?
Well, I would agree. First of all, it is time for a change, but the fact is it's like a body with lots of interwoven vein systems and organs, and they're all working in different ways. That change that takes place has to be like an orchestra. It has to come together in a way where people are moving in the same direction. And what people don't understand is the role that politics plays in changing policy. It has to do with the mindset and the opinions and the goals of the people in power. So we can claim to want to make a change right away, but the work is making sure that the people are in place that have that mind in common with you, that are in power, that give you also some remnants of power in order to participate in the just thinking through what does that change need to look like. It is too vague, to say the least, to say that change is all you need, right?
Mhm.
Because even a bad change is change. What
Yes, yes,
change are
yes.
we talking about? So it's great to have that ground roots vigilance in regards to knowing and recognizing there's a necessity. It should be also very clear that everybody, even though people in power know that the change is going to eventually need to happen, but there are some people that feel like since it's going to happen eventually anyway, let's make sure it happens slowly so we can get as much benefit out of it as possible until this change is inevitable.
Yes, yes,
Okay. Yeah.
yes.
So it's a lot of long-term planning that we need to think about. It's just not about powering through. You really need thinkers at the top that are in line with that change. And it has to be well thought out and planned long-term. It's very important.
I agree. I agree with that because when you look at change, you're talking about getting people involved in the change. Sometimes we have resistance because those who are above do not want that change to take place. Which brings me
Exactly.
to another aspect because I know you are a specialist when it comes on to policy and expert. And I've always said to people and individuals I speak with, there's always a gap between what is policy and what is practice. Regarding our
Mhm.
transformation as we are in our present time, what is the biggest gap between you see as it relates to inclusion practices that we
Yes.
intend to and the policies that we have on paper? What are limiting the implementation as it relates to inclusive agendas across different states and even in the United States?
Well, I am the most versed actually with the United States, but I can definitely compare the United States to Jamaica in a way in which, you know, obviously politics plays a role, but there is such a strong community, um, I guess you could say, like-minded vision about the goal of ensuring that students are successful in Jamaica. There's a unified vision at every level of the pyramid that wants that to happen. This
Mhm.
is amazing. Okay, that strength in and of itself, with the right financial resources and guidance and collaborations, will make, I mean, it will continue to make and produce really strong people, right? Really academically sound and competent leaders. And that's what's great about Jamaica. It's nice because it's small enough and people are, it's not as diverse in opinion as the United States. Okay, so in the United States, it's very different. It's very different because you have pockets of very different people with very different opinions, all vowing for certain resources, certain ultimate benefits of what you would describe as the American dream. So, how do you prevent certain people from realizing these dreams when you want only other people to achieve them? Right. And the source is education because it's depending on the quality of education that you have, the demand for the skills that you have developed, which is going to determine how much you earn. So it's much easier, right, to say, hey, I'm going to try to make sure that education pockets in these communities are going to be serving the need of producing people who will do manual labor, people who will feed the school to prison pipeline. There are definitely strategic limitations that are placed in the structure in order to ensure that certain populations don't achieve. This is a fact. Now, there are also people that are strongly against this. And they are not just people of color. There are people that are not of color necessarily. There are people that are much from, you know, European backgrounds, Hispanic backgrounds, you know, that would pass for Caucasian, that have been out there and putting their neck out there to do very I guess you could say pervasive and influential change for people of color, but they have met with staunch opposition
Mm.
from very powerful communities.
Yes,
And
that's true.
I would definitely encourage your viewers to look into all of the work, let's say, that our former chancellor did, Chancellor Carranza, who was I guess you could say, an equity leader. He came out full force. He called it what it was. He said, you know, these are racist structures that we have to defy. We have to make sure that our students are being led in a way and given the resources that they need to be equal to all students, you know, regardless of how their financial well-being. But he had to step down because there were no limit to the number of lawsuits that came out against him, saying that he was practicing reverse racism. There's so much opposition to these movements. So I
Mhm.
want to say that it is happening. People do agree, but the powers that be are going to try to maintain the powers that they
Yes,
have, right?
I think it's a issue of creating that dominance, and I want to sustain that movement, and I'm going to
Absolutely.
protect my privilege, and so the work goes on. Which brings me to another issue within policy, is that policies that are developed over a period of time are ideologically positioned. Hence, we have some problems that we have. You want to shed a little bit on the ideological position within policies that create limitations as it relates to the inclusion of others in our society?
Okay, so policies are written to meet the needs of all stakeholders. And so I want to explain what that means. When a policy is written, it's to take into account what are the legal guidelines or parameters that we need to have in place, but who are our proponents and opponents to this concept? How can we come up with a compromise which will at least give them some level of satisfaction where they'll see their opinions represented, maybe not 100% on either end, but it's a very middle ground approach. And what it does is it leaves an opportunity for those interpreting the policy to be able to apply their opinion about how it should be implemented. So let's take education policy, for example. I do not represent the Department of Education in my opinions. I want to make that clear. I do work there and I'm using my experience from there to as examples. But in a situation where, for example, when we had to address the changing of grade policy, the grade policy had to be changed because of the fact that some students that were wealthy continue to have access to the internet, where the majority, something close to 75% of our student population, were students of color in a less or more impoverished communities, didn't have access. So the idea that grades represent your, I guess you could say, your ability scale, right? It's your ability to be able to have mastered the information that you studied that school year that says where you should be in the next school year. Since that grade wouldn't have been accurate, it would have been fundamentally inappropriate for grades to be the primary means through which students were evaluated. There was a huge policy backlash around how do we redefine policy in a time where the grading system does not adequately represent a level of equity to demonstrate student aptitude. And so what ended up happening was the policy was written in a way where it was a narrative. It says, achieving standards, meeting standards, overachieving standards, meeting standards, and needing improvement. Now, for those people who continued to have access to computers during the COVID, this was putting them at a disadvantage because they were going to now be grouped with students who had maybe done well at their school, but weren't exceptional. But since this system was so vague in its definition, they found themselves not being able to demonstrate their superiority. Now, this is very important because it's New York City. I don't know if, I mean, most people know it's very competitive. Whatever you get in that school year is going to determine what schools you're eligible to attend the following school year, because they always look at grades. So they saw this as all the money and investment that I made and all of the privilege that I have and the resources that my child has access to. How is it that you're going to put my child in a situation where they are equal to a student that had less than that because they did well? How well according to that school. So that became a major problem, and they spoke out to their representatives, their senators. You have no idea the amount of power that they leveraged. And so what we had to do is we had to come up with a policy that said, hey, these are our general guidelines, but each school has its own grading scale. So within their own grading scale, there is an equivalent actual letter grade or number grade that can be applied at your school-based level. So what you have is a policy level that is pervasive across all boroughs. New York City has 5. But then on a local level, it is completely different on how each principal leader applies that policy based on their pre-existing values and grading scales. So I just want to explain that policy is a vehicle for compromise in most cases, so that down as you go further down the pyramid, there's more flexibility for leaders at every level to be able to exercise their power. It depends on what is the vision of that leader at that school. Are they interested in equity also? You know what I mean? How is
Yes, yes.
how is that policy going to be
Yeah.
interpreted?
That's a good point you made, because I think when you look at it, some people take the policy so rigid, and when it reaches the
Mm,
bottom, you can't even be flexible. And in any
exactly.
institution, that is a problem. You see?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and if you interpret it too widely in that context, it becomes an issue too, because I've seen that in operation. So it's based on interpretation. You know,
Yes.
looking at it, I can see that you are indeed a policy expert, and I had a question for you. I'm an inclusion person. I like to talk about inclusion. And when I look at policy, I'm always saying, you know what? Inclusion in itself will never reach the ultimate goal, but we still have to try towards that dream. I think that's so important. If you were
Absolutely.
in a position to say, all right, you are given the task of implementing reform for an organization, for example, as it relates to inclusion, give me 3 steps that you would consider to create that policy, and how would you maybe implement that policy? Just 3 clear steps as it relates to providing an inclusive framework for any organization, whether it be education or industry.
So 3 steps for providing an inclusive organization. First of all, it starts with the selection of the correct and appropriate candidate, okay, for leadership.
Exactly. Good.
That's the very first thing you have to start with, because it's in that leadership that they're going to be able to exercise the vision of inclusivity. That means that's the lens through which they should be looking when they're making all of their decisions. Who is being left out? Who is being included, and what value added do they have? What that means is that it's not just, when I say inclusion, we're talking about sexual orientation, we're talking about gender, we're talking about socioeconomic background, we're talking about political perspective. I mean, you should have on your team people that you would even count as enemies, frankly, because the fact is they are coming from a completely opposite perspective. But this is a microcosm of society. You need all of these people at the table in order to already vet out what it is that you are going to be coming up against when you're writing policy. You need that to happen in a controlled environment so that you can anticipate pushback, because it is going that whatever policy you're going to be developing is going to be circulated outside of that environment. You need to identify all of the holes, all of the conflicts, all of the issues that can be raised so that you can create the absolute best policy. So making sure you have the right group of people, that's where we begin. Secondly, there has to be a unified vision of I guess you could say community service, because one of the things you find out in politics is that a lot of people come in working in government, but at the same time they come for self-serving issues. A lot of the problems that we run into is that people are so concerned about the impression and the goals that they reach that will get them to their next big job,
So
that
true.
they're not focusing on making policy changes that can exist after them, that will be so good that the leaders coming in will want to sustain. Most of the time, and this is a big problem with policy at the top, is that every single time you have new leadership, and I know you may know in New York City, we're going to have a new mayor in November, because the mayoral race is changing. And right now, the mayor has control over our New York City schools. And when they come in, they want to come in with what they can attach their name to as a vision that they created. And see, that is a destroyer of good policy,
Whoa, whoa,
because
whoa. Yes, yes, solid, solid. And I've seen so many things. Why it's working so well and you decided to quit that one and start something else
yes,
or rebrand it as your own. I cannot fathom why to destroy something like that. And you made a very good point when you spoke about getting individuals who are of the population, representative of the population. So what we're trying to do at this point is to shake up the top level, because we're saying those boardrooms that are filled with predominantly one set of individuals must be somewhat shaken up to make
yes.
that policy change. And I see so many times. I was living in the UK once and I attended a council session, and there were 7 white males sitting on the platform saying they are diversity persons, and not one of them had sought to get representative from somewhere else. So you're spot on with that. So
I have one more. You
yes,
asked for
yes, yes,
three.
I'm waiting for the one more. I'm waiting for the one more. I know you have one more. I just wanted to put that one in. Yes.
Okay. So the final concept that I think is very, very critical is that you have to have people that understand project and program management. This is not something to take for granted. A lot of people have a concept, but they don't know all the steps that it takes to make it happen, to realize it in the short term and the long term. So we have a practice here in project management that we apply to small projects, but in program management, those sustainable policies that we want to happen over years' time, this is where program management skills are necessary, because people come in again with very big dreams, but it's all the different incremental steps that actually build a strong foundation, strong enough for it to be sustainable. And none of these policies are even going to matter if they're not sustainable policies. So people have to be trained in how, not only what is a good policy, but how do I make it so that it's strong enough to live after me?
Judy, you have given a lot of ideas regarding policy and practice. I know many people in the Caribbean and even the United States might see themselves rather, how do I start designing, developing, and implementing policy? What guidance would you give to them, and how do you get started at this point in time?
Okay, so it is true that this kind of information is not readily available. Policy is done at a very specific point in the, I guess you could say, intersection between power, financial support, oftentimes, and implementation, right, at the leadership level and the conceptual level. But the fact is that this information is available in speaking specifically about educational policy. Good educational institutions are supposed to be transparent about the kinds of policies that are available. For example, in the New York City Department of Education, that's nyc.schools.gov, you will be able to find all kinds of chancellor regulations and, let's say, grading policy and promotion policy. A lot of that information is there. So I wouldn't say that one at the level of a school principal would be writing policy. That's not where it happens, because the policy that is written is going to determine the distribution of the resources that go to all schools. However, they should be, as leaders, familiar with the policies that are being developed, and the impact that it has on them, and to understand how it was conceived, what was the goal of that policy, to see if it's actually being realized at their school. This is to be the best leader possible, but also to be able to make the contribution to changes in policy that might be necessary, because it is the principal and the people at the school level that are responsible for implementing these changes. And if they don't work, these leaders need to step up and be able to communicate with the executives that are creating this policy, that again are not in the trenches, right? And only conceptualize these concepts out of some level of understanding that they have, that is extraneous to actual, having done it themselves. So it's very important that as leaders at the principal level, that they ensure that they are communicating what it really is like at the level at which they are, what works, what doesn't work, so that we can contribute to improved policies. We can't just sit back and say, oh, this doesn't work. These people are just such bad leaders. No, you are a leader yourself, and you have a role to play in this leadership pyramid. And the full exercise of that role is to make that level of contribution, that intellectual contribution around what doesn't work, to improve it, not just for your own school, but for all schools.
Excellent.
So, yes, so they would need to definitely start to do some research. The research is out there. I mean, it's more out there than it ever has been. The fact is, however, is oftentimes people are so busy to actually put the time in to look. Yeah. But we need to, as leaders at every level of this pyramid, be our very, very best. And that means you have to be your most informed, and you have to use your voice. You have to use the power that you have. Don't feel disempowered just because you aren't at the table at the top making those decisions. You aren't disempowered because you have other leaders like yourself at that level as school leaders that can come together and be extremely powerful in policy change and implementation.
Excellent, positive, powerful. And let me say, you talked about policy not working, and I'm not going to touch a part of evaluation because I think that's for another interview, because that would take another time. And I know as we're wrapping up, I want to ask you to give your final words regarding anything that you want to address as it relates to policy practice, especially within the context of Jamaica and the United States?
Okay, well, honestly, I think we have put our faith in the right place when it comes to prioritizing education for our people throughout the diaspora in Jamaica and the United States and everywhere in the world. The fact is there is no better generator of energy and development of not just opportunity, but development of character and potential that education can provide. However, education is not limited to what takes place in the classroom. We have to be educated about our society. We have to be educated about ourselves, what our strengths are, so we can develop those and get the education we need in whatever place we can get it, libraries, books, wherever you have to get it, in order to develop your skills to be someone who contributes to our society at a local level and on an international level. This is very important because, unfortunately, my opinion is that too much is left to the design of policy. People making decisions about the direction that we go based on concepts and understandings that they don't have about our full character and our potential. We have to take back our power. We have to learn outside of the classroom. We have to learn from each other. We have to work in partnership. We have to see, what does this society need and where can we make a difference where we haven't before, and where, if we have, how can we make it even deeper, right? So I just want education to be perceived in a way that is much more global and much more pervasive, and develop internal character and skills, because that is what people pay for. It's your intellectual property. It's what you can provide as a thought leader, as somebody with concepts and ideas and ways of implementing that haven't been thought of before. We are a very great people. Jamaicans, I'm so proud to be one. We are so creative and so talented. We need to make sure that the world knows that, right? And it starts with us. And I think we're on a good track. We have a lot of great Jamaicans going around, but we have a lot more that are coming up, and we want to ensure that they're maintaining that level of strength.
Wow, 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 and wow again. Inspiring conversation, powerful discussion, eye-opening discussion regarding policy and practice. I wish everyone will be able to listen to this from the diaspora group. It is a powerful piece of conversation, and you have highlighted the need for us to be transparent as it relates to policy, for us to have our voice in policy, for us to be ensuring our pathways are clear by advocating for ourselves. Policy, as I realize and you have articulated this afternoon, it's not something that is done overnight. It takes time for change. Although I brought up the issue of 400 years, you have informed me it will take a bit longer, but we have to make sure what we're getting is going to be real and sustained. And let me tell you this, I have enjoyed listening to you. And as a matter of fact, I will say this is not an end to an interview, but I'm sure we'll have another occasion to discuss, because we are onto something else, the evaluation. Judy, it has been a wonderful pleasure for Real Talk to have you here this afternoon. And I do look forward to having greater conversations with you. Thanks, because I'm sure you'll continue to give to Jamaica, give to United States, and contribute immensely to the future generation. Thanks so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Dr. Jowallah. Thank you.